Today is Tuesday, April 7th, 2020, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Ron Paul, former congressman from Texas, who ran for president of the U.S. 3 times in 1988, 2008, and 2012. And he's also got the YouTube channel, Ron Paul Liberty Report, which you should check out and subscribe to. Very good YouTube channel. Thank you for accepting my invitation to come on my channel, Dr. Paul.
Good to be with you today.
The Mises Institute motto, which Mises Institute, of course, is dedicated to the teaching of the principles of the Austrian School of Economics. It says, and it's from Virgil, "Tuna sed in malis, sed contra audidentur ito," which basically means you should not give in to evils, but proceed even more boldly against them. So I thought, with what's going on in the world right now, who would be the best person other than you to talk about what the Federal Reserve and Uncle Sam and central banks all around the world, here in England, and treasuries, what they're doing to our currencies, to our debt, it just seems crazy. So I thought it'd be appropriate to have you on. As the Fed, of course, they've gone completely rogue. They've increased their balance sheet by almost $2 trillion in the last 6 weeks. Congress has passed and the president has signed up to $6 trillion in fiscal stimulus. So could you touch upon your 2009 book, and the Fed, and tell our viewers why it's so important for them to learn about what the Fed really is, and why sound money is so important if we would like to live in a free and open society?
I became fascinated with monetary policy, and especially the Federal Reserve, a good many years ago, before I even got into politics. Matter of fact, I was fascinated. You got exposed to Austrian economics and sound money back in the 60s. There was a prediction made that the current system, the Bretton Woods system, would collapse. And those who predicted it were, the free market economists. And sure enough, in 1971, that occurred. Following that, I started speaking out because I could see the significance of this, a major significance of the dollar reserve standard being so massive and becoming pure fiat, no link at all to sound money, which is gold. And sure enough, we've had a bad time since 1971, but it's gotten much worse because it's unique. The whole idea of governments or central banks around the world throughout history have assumed that the government should have monopoly control of the money, and that they can increase the supply of money for the benefit of the governments and their special interests. And that's been done off and on, sometimes a lot worse than others. But what has happened here in the last nearly 50 years has been unique in history. There's never been this type of monetary inflation throughout our history. And we've never had such a solid type of globalism, the connection of all the currencies and all the other currencies being defined in terms of dollars. Now, that's not too bad. It worked when it was defined in a dollar that was guaranteed in gold. Even though that was a reserve exchange standard, it still was a little bit better than what we have. But what we have gone through now is the massive inflation of the money supply. Inflation is dealing with the money supply. So those of us in the Austrian school have predicted that, the NASDAQ bubble was there, the housing bubble was there, and this one the boom has lasted longer, the bubble is bigger than ever, and the problems are greater than ever. And even though I was well prepared psychologically and intellectually for a bust, this one came really with a thud. This is a big bust, and it's worldwide, and it shows the total failure of the principle of creating money out of thin air, because when they get away with it, they're acting as a counterfeiter. And the people who benefit, before everybody discovers it's really counterfeit money, there's a lot of people who benefit, and that is militarism does, welfareism does, banking industries does, the military and industrial complex. All these people benefit, but it's all fake. It's all on borrowed money. It's all a pretense, and it causes a lot of harm to the middle class. It eliminates the middle class. It wipes out the middle class by destroying the money. And that's where we are at its conclusion. And it's very, very much more severe, mainly because of the coronavirus crisis, because those coming together has given the world some real challenges as to what should be done from here on out.
Yes, and it looks like they're really using this crisis as an excuse to ramp up the money printing, the debt creation by Congress everywhere around the world. Do you think it will work, or is this it? Are we witnessing the end of the petrodollar, the Fiat dollar standard?
I think that the dollar standard, in where the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, it will end. We'll still have dollars. You know, the British pound was the reserve currency of the world for a good while at the height of their existence. But you still have a pound, but it's different. So you may have a dollar later on, but I think it's very negative for the United States, because we assume tremendous power because of this. We have financial and military power. We buy all our weapons with fiat money, and the people around the world take it and they use it. So we have benefited, and the empire has been developed, and we now have the authority to you tell other countries how to live. And this to me is a very bad situation, and I think that will be lost. I think our foreign policy will become weaker and weaker. We will not be able to throw our weight around once the rejection of the dollar occurs. But it's up for grabs right now. It's going to take a while. I think everybody's going to be suffering together, because there's not an easy substitute unless the world wakes up tomorrow, like the Austrian economists would like, is use real money. Yeah, and there are some countries now that are thinking about it. There are countries buying gold and thinking about it. If that reform comes and you can trust them, and they have a government that won't spend excessively, and you can trust what they're going, that will resolve it. And you don't have to have a centralized government issuing the reserve currency of the world. Everybody should just accept gold as the reserve.
In your book, and the Fed, you talk about the experiences of Germany in the 1920s, and also after World War II in the US, how you got like quite a bit of inflation after the war in the US, of course, the hyperinflation in Germany. And right now, with all the money printing that we're seeing from the Fed, and the debt ramping up to almost 25 trillion, there's still a lot of people who say, oh, it's not going to cause any rising prices or hyperinflation. We know what we're doing. And at the same time, a lot of people are comparing this crisis to a war crisis. So is it possible, once we're out of this, that all this money will flood into the system, and we could see people losing confidence in the currency, and maybe even see a German-style hyperinflation?
Yeah, I think that'll start. I think we're in the middle of it. And for people to assume that we really didn't have much inflation these past 10 years, especially, with the big bailouts and all, with tremendous increase in the money supply. And that should be the definition of the inflation. So we don't say, well, there is no inflation because the CPI isn't going up rapidly. Well, first off, the CPI is not reliable. They fudge on that. But the standard of living is going down for the average person. Their cost of living is going up, but not like it was in the 70s. There's no doubt about it. But there was still a lot of inflation. The money was created when the price of a bond goes up. The interest rates goes down. So when everybody starts talking about zero and negative interest rates, that means the price of those bonds are very, very high. So they're very inflated. And that's why there's a bond bubble and a dollar bubble, because so much of these worldwide bonds, the ones that people care about, are very, very expensive. So the inflation has been there. But I think your question is, now we're even doing more. Will we see the time where people will be more aware of it? Oh, it can make stocks and bonds go up in price, but it can also do the other. All the money can gravitate to the consumer. And this is what's happening now. They're talking about helicopter money, passing the money out to the consumer and to all the businesses that have failed. Yes, that's going to push prices up. And I think it'll come quicker than we think. I don't think it's going to be after a resolution of the crisis now, and in 5 years, you're going to have the price inflation. I think you're going to see it. I think it's probably occurring right now. The price of gold is going up. I was checking the other day with the market. It's really hard to even find gold, because too many people want it. So there is this price inflation, and the adjustment period is a long way to go, because so often it gets mixed up in the militarism, and the militarism means that the people will have to be worrying about a war going on, rather than just trying to work harder and get rid of it. So that I think the price inflation is coming. I think it's going to be very bad. I think we're starting already on it, but just how it evolves depends a lot on what Mises called human action. Because if the people decide to buy bonds instead of commodities, then you have a different set of circumstances. But when they switch from bonds over to daily products, then you see a different situation. But right now, the correction, the bursting of the bubble, is the time when the debt has to be wiped out, as well as the malinvestment, and that is a big job. And that's why, with the virus included as well, that the problems are just overwhelming, and there's no easy out for this. So we're going to be seeing the problems with this for a few years yet to come, and it's going to be very, very serious, and unlikely we'll be able to get away without having a lot of violent confrontations to get this fixed.
Yeah, and people talk about Japan and the deflation there, but I've looked into the Japanese yen. It's gone from, the ounce of gold there has gone from 60,000 20 years ago, and it's now almost 200,000. So if you consider a currency that's losing value versus gold as inflation, they've actually had inflation. And I'm sure they also probably fudging the numbers. The CPI numbers like we do in the West. What about, do you think, because there's a lot of talk about President Trump being against the Federal Reserve, that he's going to abolish the Fed, but I don't see any signs of that. And if anything, he's been critical, but seems to be working with the Fed. What are your hopes for that?
Yeah, he was highly critical of the Fed, and I've been highly critical of the Fed. I don't think they should have the power to create money out of thin air. There should be a lot less monetary inflation. But his complaint was interest rates weren't low enough, and you have to print a lot more money. And he was able to pressure them, and they really did respond to his demands. But that just made the bubble bigger, and the bubble finally burst, and that's why this crisis is bigger than it was. So during that period of time, he was making it just worse. It is true that during his campaign, he has said some things about the Federal Reserve. I think somebody asked him once whether he would support the Ron Paul audit the Fed bill, and I think he sort of alluded to, or something like that. So he was probably political in that answer, but he's not likely to be the champion of monetary reform and abolishing the Fed. He would probably just set some more different rules for them and tell them what they can do.
Another question that a lot of my viewers always ask me, especially in the US, is about gold confiscation. And in your book, And the Fed, which I've been rereading because I read it years ago, you talk about in the 70s when you could still buy gold before gold was legalized again in the US in 1975. Maybe you can talk a little bit to the viewers about the situation there and how they could maybe protect themselves right now if they are concerned about that?
Yes, I said I read Austrian economics in the 60s, and it was not legal for Americans to own gold. It was taken away from Americans to own gold back in 1933. But the handwriting was on the wall. We knew it was coming, and you couldn't buy the gold, and yet gold was the haven. It was fixed at $35 an ounce. That's why de Gaulle, he was the one that alerted everybody. He said, we're sick and tired of taking your dollars. We're going to turn in our dollars because the foreigners could turn in dollars for gold. So he started doing that, and others did too, and drained a lot of gold, finally to the point where Nixon had to close the gold and declare in a way a bankruptcy. We can't back the dollar anymore. So there were quite a few of us that thought, well, we want to own gold too. And there was the way the law was written was that if you had numismatic coins, you saved coins as a hobby, and have special value to coins, you could own those. So the thing that happened was Mexico started minting pesos and backdated them. So they looked like, they claimed they were numismatic, but we could buy them. And actually, we were able to do it. We could buy coins, and they were called numismatic, which they weren't. They were freshly minted, and that lasted for a few years. So I think I probably started buying some gold coins in the early 70s, but then eventually, it became legal again to own gold in 1975.
So, I think you said in the book that the date is 1947. If it's 1947 or before, it's numismatic. Is that still the?
Oh yeah, they put the date. I think that was the date on the coin. Anyway, it qualified, and we were able to buy them, and that was sort of. There weren't too many people doing that because they went for so many decades. It's pretty amazing that people didn't really care. And right now, of course, everybody wonders, will they ever do that again? And my answer to that is they probably won't do it again where they say turn it in. You have to turn in all your gold. But they might make it very, very uncomfortable because they like to punish people who have gold. That's why they rig the prices of gold. And they would have you do that, but they might if you have a crisis and the dollar isn't working and you start using gold, they might decide that the gold has to be taxed, at 50% or something like that. Essentially, it would be confiscated, but it wouldn't be like the feds are going to knock on our doors and say, "Do you have any gold coins here? You have to turn them in." I don't think that's going to happen.
Interesting. There, you talked about manipulation and. I worked in the city of London for many years, and when I first bought gold in '02, I started following the market very closely because it wasn't the market that I traded. But I noticed every day, at the same time, the price would drop before the COMEX opened. So I just wanted to finish off. You have a little story here about when you were working on the Gold Commission and you were meeting Paul Volcker, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and one of his aides was around. Do you remember that? Can you tell us the story to finish?
Well, yeah, I think so. But he wasn't involved in the Gold Commission. But it might be the fact that in a crisis of the it was 1979. Because the 70s was a mess when they repealed the Bretton Woods. But I went to have a private breakfast with him, and my aide was with me. And we met. When we arrived there, it was Volcker's aide that said hello, and we were talking. It was just my aide, Volcker's aide, and myself. And then, and this was at the height of when gold was hitting. Back then, it was historic. It was like $700 and $800, and people were very concerned about the system. And then in a little bit, Volcker walked in, and ordinarily, in the past, we would bump into each other. We'd say hello and shake hands. But he immediately went over to his aide, and his question was, "What's the price of gold?" Which means gold was very, very important. Even though they work real hard, they essentially rigged the price of gold at $35 an ounce for a long time. And they will, and they keep doing it. but it was approved to me that the gold price, and gold was very important to them, although they denied it. But that is the reason they have to, try to preserve confidence in the dollar. But that was when the confidence was eroding. And that's why once gold became legal and Bretton Woods broke down, gold went from $35 an ounce up to over $800 and then corrected after that. But that was a major period of time where the gold markets were really in flux.
So I guess it wasn't a tradition for him, the gold
Right.
price. But yeah, just to finish off here, because we're running out of time, can you just tell our viewers who sometimes get a bit worried about the swings in the price of gold and silver, how they should think about gold and silver as investors?
As an investor?
Yeah, or a saver.
Yeah. Well, I thought of it. I can think about what I did once I knew what was happening. I thought gold and silver, having coins is very important. It preserves wealth. I've considered owning the shares of gold and silver companies. That is not as good as owning metal because it is a financial asset rather than money. And I think that people can still do it now, but you have to adjust to the times that we have. And right now, gold price is high. So for a modest income person, it's pretty hard to be able to buy very many ounces of gold when it's 1,500. But it's much higher than that. There's a premium, a huge premium on gold and silver. So the prices are going up, but people can own silver, and I think when they can, they should, because that's one thing that people can use. But those old silver dollars, when the coinage was made, whether it's foreign or American silver, that is useful too as an investment. But it's a way of trying to protect against government. But the conclusion of this is you can do all those things. You can provide, for your future, save your money, have some land, have survival equipment. But ultimately, the only thing that counts is your freedom. If you have your freedom, you go to work and keep what you earn. And that's what they need to do now with the world. They just need to get rid of the Federal Reserve and the taxing authorities. And even if you have nothing, if you have your freedom to go out and earn a living and keep what you earn, everything will come out all right. Unfortunately, though, the freedoms in our country are being constantly eroded, whether it was after 9/11 with the Patriot Act, and now we have this thing going on with the virus and all the laws that they're passing. So it's a threat to our liberties, which to me is a greater threat than a threat to our financial stability, which would be corrected if we were allowed to just be free.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. It was a pleasure having you, and I wish you all the best. And for my viewers, make sure you check out Dr. Paul's YouTube channel, Ron Paul Liberty Report.